Welcome, friends. It was a bright morning in the corporate office. The CEO, Clara, sat on a sofa holding a paper with a complex math formula, written by a little girl named Lily. Clara looked amazed. Clara said, "This is incredible work. Who taught you this formula, sweetheart?" The office went silent. Lily looked down shyly, then pointed her little finger toward a man in brown overalls mopping the shiny floor. Lily said softly, "My dad taught me." Clara turned and looked at the janitor, shocked. The man stopped mopping and stood still, his eyes filled with emotion. Clara whispered, "Your father." The janitor nodded and said, "Yes, ma'am. I used to be a math teacher before I lost my job, but I never stopped teaching my daughter." Tears filled Clara's eyes. She stood up slowly and walked toward him. Clara said, "You don't belong with the mop. You belong in a classroom." The janitor smiled faintly, and Lily ran to hug him tightly. The entire office started clapping, some wiping their eyes. Clara said, "From tomorrow you'll lead our new education program. We need people like you." The janitor's eyes filled with tears of gratitude as he looked at his daughter proudly. The narrator said, "Sometimes the brightest minds are hidden in the most humble places. All they need is one chance to shine." Friends, if this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Soul of Kindness. The next morning, the office was filled with whispers. Everyone had heard the story of the janitor and his daughter. Some couldn't believe it, others were deeply moved. Lily walked into the office holding her father's hand. Her little yellow dress fluttered as she smiled up at him. He still wore the same brown uniform, but today, his walk was different. There was pride in every step. Clara came forward and greeted them warmly. "Good morning, Mr. Thomas. From now on, you'll work in the education development room. I want you to help us design new learning programs for underprivileged kids." The janitor, Thomas, looked down, speechless. "Ma'am, I don't know how to thank you. I was just trying to make sure my daughter never gave up on learning." Clara smiled softly. "You already thanked me, Mr. Thomas, by raising a daughter who believes in her father's wisdom." Lily looked up and said, "Daddy always said knowledge is the only thing that never leaves you." Her words touched everyone in the room. Even the guards and clerks paused to listen. Some had tears in their eyes. Clara said, "You see, that's the kind of lesson no business degree can teach. You've reminded me what real success looks like." She handed Lily a small notebook and said, "This is for you, Lily. One day, you'll write your own formulas. Here, and maybe even teach the world something new." Lily's eyes sparkled as she hugged Clara. Thomas looked away for a moment, hiding his tears. The narrator said, "Sometimes, all it takes is one act of kindness to rewrite someone's entire destiny." Friends, remember, respect every person no matter their position, because behind every humble uniform there might be a heart full of dreams. A few weeks later, the company's conference hall was filled with reporters, employees and students. Banners read, "Education for All, a Vision by CEO." Clara and Mr. Thomas, the janitor who once cleaned the floors, was now standing at the front of the stage, wearing a simple white shirt and black trousers. Beside him stood his daughter Lily, holding a small notebook. The room was silent as Thomas adjusted the microphone with trembling hands. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "Not long ago," he said softly, "I was invisible in this building. People walked past me every day. I cleaned their offices, emptied their bins, and mopped their floors. But no one ever looked at me, except for one person, my little girl." He paused, looking at Lily. His voice cracked as he continued. "She believed I was still a teacher, even when the world said I was just a janitor. She reminded me that knowledge never fades. Only opportunities do." The crowd was silent. Some employees who once ignored him now looked down in shame. Clara, standing at the side, wiped her tears quietly. Thomas continued, "When you give someone dignity, you give them life." Again, Miss Clara didn't just change my job, she restored my purpose. He looked toward the audience, voice steady now. "I may have been sweeping floors, but my heart was still teaching. And now, I promise to use this second chance to teach children who've lost theirs." The crowd erupted in applause. Lily ran up and hugged her father tightly. She whispered, "I'm proud of you, Daddy. Tears streamed down his face as he said, "No, sweetheart. I'm proud of you. You're the reason I kept believing." Clara stepped forward and said, "Let this be a reminder to all of us. True intelligence doesn't come from titles or degrees. It comes from love, humility, and courage." The entire hall stood in a standing ovation. Even the security guards and office cleaners were clapping, their eyes shining with hope. The narrator said softly, "When you believe in someone who's forgotten their worth, you light a fire that can illuminate the whole world." A few months passed, and the new education program had already changed countless lives. Children from poor families were coming to learn at the company's new training center, a place born from kindness and belief. On one sunny morning, Clara visited the classroom quietly, without announcing her arrival. Inside, she saw something that made her heart melt. Mr. Thomas was sitting on the floor with a group of children, teaching them math with chalk and paper. Lily sat beside him, helping a younger boy solve a problem. There were no fancy screens or laptops, just laughter, learning, and hope. Clara watched silently from the doorway. She saw the same janitor who once mopped her floors, now shaping young minds with the same hands that once carried buckets. Thomas noticed her and stood up quickly. "Ma'am, I didn't know you were coming." Clara smiled softly. "I didn't come as a CEO today, Thomas. I came as a student, to learn what real leadership looks like." He looked down humbly. "You gave me this chance, ma'am. You believed in a man the world had forgotten." Clara shook her head gently. "No, Mr. Thomas. You reminded me that every person has a light inside them. I just removed the dust." Just then, a small girl from the class raised her hand and said shyly, "Sir, I didn't understand this question." Thomas knelt down beside her, explaining with patience. The girl's face lit up with joy when she solved it. She clapped her hands and said, "I did it." The whole class cheered. Lily clapped too, her eyes shining proudly at her father. Clara wiped a tear and said, This is what real success looks like." She looked at the children and said, "One day, all of you will grow up and teach others. And that's how the world will keep getting better." Thomas looked at her and said quietly, "Ma'am, when I used to clean these floors, I thought my life had no meaning. But now every child's smile gives me a reason to live again." Clara replied, her voice trembling, "And every act of kindness gives the world a reason to hope again." The camera slowly zoomed out, the bright classroom filled with children laughing, drawing and learning together. The narrator said, "When you choose compassion over judgment, you change not just one life, but generations to come." It was a year later. The company had grown, the education program had expanded to several cities, and hundreds of children who once had no hope were now studying because of one man's story. The janitor who became a teacher again. That morning, the company held its annual event in a large auditorium decorated with lights and banners. The words on the screen behind the stage read, "One spark of kindness can light 1,000 lives." Employees, students, parents, and reporters filled the hall. Clara walked on stage, but this time she wasn't the center of attention. All eyes were on Mr. Thomas and his daughter Lily standing beside her. Clara began speaking softly. "A year ago, I asked a little girl, 'Who taught you this formula?' And her answer changed my life. Today, I want to thank that little girl and her father, not for their knowledge, but for their hearts." The audience clapped warmly. Clara turned to Thomas and said, "You reminded us that greatness doesn't wear a suit. It wears humility, it carries love, and it never gives up." Thomas looked at the crowd, his hands trembling as he took the microphone. "When I lost my old job as a teacher, I thought my story was over. But God sent me a lesson through my daughter, and a miracle through Ms. Clara's kindness." He looked at Lily, who was now wearing a neat school uniform with a medal around her neck. "My daughter taught me that even when life breaks you, love can build you back." Lily stepped forward and said in her soft, innocent voice, "My dad didn't just teach me math. He taught me to believe, even when no one else does." The crowd went silent. A few people in the front row were crying. The janitors, office workers, and even senior executives stood together, clapping, not for power, not for wealth, but for humanity. Clara smiled through tears. Mr. Thomas, you've changed this company forever. You turned a place of business into a place of purpose. She handed him a golden plaque that read, "To Mr. Thomas, a man who cleaned floors yet lifted hearts." Thomas broke down, unable to speak. Lily hugged him tightly, whispering, "You did it, Daddy." He whispered back, "No, my love, we did it." The audience stood in a roaring applause. Clara turned to everyone and said, "If you ever doubt your worth, remember this story. One act of kindness can rewrite destiny." The lights dimmed as the narrator's voice spoke gently over the music. Sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear capes or crowns. They hold mops, raise children, and teach the world that love is the highest wisdom. The camera faded out slowly, showing Thomas and Lily walking hand in hand down the stage, surrounded by clapping people and shining lights. Friends, if this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Soul of Kindness, where every story reminds you that kindness is the most powerful formula of all.